Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
Snicked, and I'm Cam the Provocateur.
Yes, our claws are unleashed and we continue our journey into X-Men First Class. I can't wait to examine it further with you, Cam, but we're not doing it alone. Who is joining us in this SpyMaster interview?
We have an exceptional guest joining us this week. Beaming into the podcast, we have screenwriter Ashley Miller, who co-wrote X-Men First Class and is also the co-host of the Inglorious Treksperts podcast.
A wonderful Star Trek-based podcast that I thoroughly recommend you all check out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the show goes on. But really, we are digging deep into the depths of X-Men First Class. There are some fantastic stories, some revelations inside this interview that you will have never heard before, and they may just turn some heads. So without further ado, folks, you're going to love it. Let's get to it. Ashley E. Miller coming up right now. Okay, Cam, we promised the people this week some experts, and I can't think of a better expert than our guest joining us right now. He is a writer, a producer, and 1/3 of the Inglorious Treksperts. It is none other than Mr. Ashley E. Miller. Hello, sir. How are you?
I am great. How are you guys?
Doing fantastic. Or excellent.
Ugh. I mean, people who listened to the episode earlier this week with a review of X-Men First Class got a lot of X puns. So I think we've exhausted that joke already. I think can we just dispense of that really early?
Oh yeah, exactly.
For goodness sake. Now, we want to get into the meat about X-Men First Class with you because it's had a very interesting gestation process.
Oh yes.
Which I really want to take apart because there's bits of information online, but I feel like the full story isn't quite out there.
Boy.
I feel like you might be the key to it.
Well, I was there, so yeah. It's funny the moment that you said gestation story, I got PTSD, which was great. So tell me that I'm safe and we can continue and we'll be fine. But
safe space. No one's listening. It's just us. Trust. There's no one else out there.
Nobody else can hear us. We're fine. I'm not back there. It's done. It's over. Promise me. Promise me.
You are safe here. You are safe. But let's wind the clock back a little bit. Before X-Men, before Cody Banks, which we want to touch on as well, screenwriting. That's what you do.
Yes.
What made you want to become a filmmaker, to get into the film industry in the first place? It's a hell of a job to do.
Madness. I mean, honestly, unlike most of my peers, I didn't really understand that screenwriting was like a job when I was in college. Never went through my head that it was something that I wanted to do. Even though, even going back to being a child, I wanted to be a writer. I thought I wanted to be a novelist, discovered I didn't have the discipline to write a novel. I thought I would write short stories, and I realized that the bottom fell out of the short story market in about 1897.
Yeah.
Once they stopped paying by the word because Dickens fucked it up for everybody. And I happened across it because at the time when I just gotten out of school, I was on the Star Trek plan, by the way, the 5-year mission.
Yeah.
I had just gotten out and I was teaching middle school creative writing and English. And I was looking for something interesting to do with my creative writing students. And I thought, film is kind of interesting. So I started, doing my research into how it was done. And what struck me the most about it was the development process, not the process involving the studio, but the process of sitting down and outlining, of beating it out, the fact that there was a structure. And that really opened my eyes. So my film school and my screenwriting school was largely watching movies and taking notes. There were only like 1 or 2 books at that point, so there wasn't a hell of a lot to read. One of those books was Sid Field, but I watched things. I would, at the end of when I finished, watching a movie, I would just write copious notes to myself about what I had just seen and why I thought it worked or why I thought it didn't and how I would fix it and why I would fix it that way. I started to go to movies just again and again, and I would sit in the back of the theater and not like a Pee Wee Herman thing, just me sitting in the back of the theater, and I would watch the movies, and as the movies were going, I would try to uh, in my head write out the action on the screen to time with the action, just to kind of get a sense of what was that pace and how did that feel. I mean, it was the nuttiest shit ever. I wrote a bunch of not great stuff, trying to figure it out. It was quite a journey, but I got it in my head that maybe it was something that I could do, because the the outlining process, the planning process, really made up for my inherent lack of discipline, which was basically a consequence of the fact that I am the ADHD poster child. So it's a weird job, man. It's not a job people understand at all. Even people who do it
Right.
don't understand it.
Well, I'm curious, you say you're going to the movies and basically taking copious notes on what you were watching. What time period of this and what movies were you looking at?
It was the 90s, the early 90s through the late 90s. And it was anything and everything. I'm just a big cinephile, as they say, but not like a hoity-toity one. I'm not going to sit around and talk to you about art and cinema. I'll talk to you about what I like. And my tastes are very eclectic. So, if it was something that was interesting, frankly, even if it wasn't, I would sit there and do it. It didn't matter the genre, science fiction, horror, action, crime, you name it. I mean, I guess the only exceptions to that were I really had a thing for Merchant and Ivory films. Those don't lend themselves very well to sitting back and writing out the action. And then they rearranged the doily. It just okay.
Well, so that's sort of the film basis that you're working from. We haven't really got to how you got into that, because you realized that's something you wanted to do. You sort of brought that to be. How did you get that foot in the door?
Well, it's funny you ask. One of the Inglorious Treksperts. I managed to find my door through arguing about Star Trek on the internet.
Wow.
Back in the 90s, when the internet was cans and string and everything was black and white, there was, and people don't use it anymore, really. It still technically exists, Usenet. And there was a whole group of Usenet groups that were like rec arts, sci-fi TV dot whatever, or alt dot Star Trek dot whatever, or alt dot SFTV dot whatever. And generally it was all the same people cross-posting to each other, having gigantic arguments about crap. And I waded, because I was want to wade into arguments about Star Trek. And I waded into an argument that was raging about an article that my erstwhile writing partner, Zach Stentz, had written, and it was a great article, and it was comparing the Babylon 5, Deep Space Nine fandom flame wars to religious wars, to, Shia Sunni conflicts. And it was a fascinating piece. And he had interviewed some Star Trek writers. He had interviewed Robert Hewitt Wolf, who was a producer on Deep Space Nine at the time, quite a bit. Robert was quoted heavily in that article. He'd reached out to Joe Straczynski, and Joe declined the interview. Didn't want to talk about it. So, article comes out. Joe's not quoted. They're roasting Zach over the coals. Robert, at that point, was engaged in the Usenet community. And so they were blasting at each other. And I remember just feeling completely offended by the behavior of a lot of the people who were online, a lot of the trolls. There used to be a rule. It was the punch in the face rule on Usenet, which is that if the thing that you're typing to somebody on the internet would get you punched in the face in real life, don't type it. We've lost track of that rule, sadly.
A very long time ago.
A very long time ago, unfortunately.
What a gentle time that was, yeah.
Oh my, and it was like, it was, for the time, it was pretty ugly. Except in some ways it was uglier because everybody who was using it was smart. And, having a flame war with very smart people who were basically nerds sitting in their mom's basement, is it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. So I weighed in on this thing, and I just let people have it. And I got an email from Zach, and he said, "Ashley, you rule the universe. Thanks so much, Zach Stentz." And I thought, now here is a smart person with taste, discretion.
He gets it.
He gets it. He gets it. I got to get to know him. So, we got to know each other. We realized we were both writers. We sent each other our samples, and we just had a lot of compatibility, creatively speaking, and a lot of the same interests. And there was but it wasn't a complete overlap. There was a bit of a Venn diagram where there were things that I was over here and he was over here, but that just made it more interesting and better. And one of the other outcomes was that that Zach ended up uh, becoming friends with Robert Wolf. So when Zach and I started going into to Deep Space Nine and to Voyager to pitch, because they had, it was very I wouldn't say that it was open, but it wasn't hard to get a pitch set up in one of those places if they liked you the first time that you went in. I never went in to pitch. I basically sat with Zach and worked out pitches. But Zach would go in and pitch, and almost every time he went, he would have lunch with Robert, who at that point had left Deep Space Nine. And Robert would say, "Here's why they didn't buy that. Here's why they should have bought that. If you had done this, they would have bought that. I would have bought that. I would have bought that." Right? It was just that kind of thing. We incorporated that feedback. And when I first met, no, look, again, internet was Kansas string. I was on the East Coast. Zach was on the West Coast. He was actually in San Francisco. He ended up moving down to LA in like late 98. And we had never seen each other's faces. Okay. To put context on this, the usual suspects, right? Like the whole movie turns on the fact that it takes an hour and a half to fax Kaiser Soze's mugshot. You just didn't know what people looked like. I'd heard his voice.
Yeah, that was like the movie No Way Out as well.
Yeah.
Forever to get the photo, yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. I was Yuri. And I was like, holy shit, at least I get to be Costa. That's the exciting part. As a surprise, I went out to meet Zach on his birthday. And Robert was invited over for his birthday party. And he said, "Oh, by the way, guys, that thing that you pitched to Voyager that they didn't buy that they should have bought," he said, "I'm going to buy that for my show, for my new show, for Andromeda." He said, "Holy shit." So we had made our first sale, almost, not without trying, but without trying. He invited us in to pitch. I went in, we prepped 7 pitches. We went in January of 2000. We pitched 7 ideas to him. He bought 5 in the room. He gave us a script assignment. And, I showed up, went in my first writer's room. It was like a week of breaking the story, and Zach and I would run back to his house and we would work on the outline. We turned in the outline like 3 hours after we finished the break because we were just that like, go, go, go. Wrote the script, and I got a call April 1st of 2000. I'll never forget it, with Robert offering us a staff job. I thought he was kidding. And I, moved myself and my wife out to the West Coast. She had to stay back. She was a teacher. But, I said before that people don't understand that screenwriting is a job. Going into my boss and saying, "So here's the thing. And I was doing a completely different job at the time. I said, I am gonna move to Los Angeles and become a staff writer on a syndicated science fiction action show. And I'm just going to continue to manage my team from 2,500 miles away." And it was like, he looked at me like I was, forgive me, from outer space. Like none of that made sense to him. He was like, "Sure," because he knew I could do it. But it was just, he didn't understand what that job was. Nobody that I worked with really truly understood what that job was. It sounded cool to them, but they didn't understand. The truth of the matter is I didn't completely understand either. But I used to tell people I fell out of the sky with a job. I didn't. I worked, for 10 years. I would I mean, 30 hours a week just on teaching myself how to write or writing or coming up with pitches or whatever on top of my regular job. And then networking and, stress testing ideas and all that other stuff. But if it were not for Star Trek, I would not have a career. And also, I just want to point out one last thing, which is that, and if you're a writer out there and you are thinking, gee, how do I get into the business? Let me tell you how we sold 5 out of 7 stories. I told you before that I would go and I would take copious notes on movies that I would watch, and I would break things down, and then I would go and I would write them in my head. I went back and I watched every single episode of Star Trek that had Robert's name again and again and again, and I broke it down. I broke down what all of those things had in common, where they were different, how they were different. And I mapped out how that guy saw a story, like what he liked. I reverse engineered his taste. So when we put together those pitches were built to his taste. We ultimately ended up doing all 7 of them. We just happened to sell 5 of them while we were sitting there because it was for him. And there was a lot of work that went into prepping that for him.
We've talked to a lot of screenwriters, and I've never heard anyone actually lay it out that way, and kind of the business side and the marketing yourself approach as well, and how important that is.
Mm-hmm. It's very important. Look, the truth of the matter is this: when you're going out for a writing job, a staff job, let's start there, right, with TV. It's not just about your words on the page. The assumption is that if you're a professional in the business, you can put words on the page. By the way, that's not always a great assumption. But let's just say that it is, because if somebody has gotten to the stage of having a meeting with you and they're a showrunner and they haven't read you yet, well, shame on them. Okay, so assume that you deserve to be in the room based on your writing. The reason why you're having a meeting is because the showrunner is asking himself or herself, do I want to spend 12 to 14 hours a day sitting in a conference room with this human being? Do I think I can rely on this person, trust this person, like this person? What am I going to get out of it? And, half the job is of getting a job is just selling yourself in that way and coming off as a professional, as somebody who is going to contribute and somebody who is going to be pleasant and a joy, because not everyone is. They aren't. But the same thing, frankly, goes for working in features. I think it was Craig Mazin, who I went to a presentation he did several years ago, and he said, look, the truth is that studio executives live in a state of perpetual anxiety, and they will give the job to the person who walks in the room and makes their anxiety go down. They will keep giving jobs to people who, when they wake up in the morning and they look at their call sheet, their anxiety level does not go up when they see your name on it, right? Anything that makes them feel like I'm safe and I'm cool, you'll work. And that's it. That's the secret. And you get there by delivering first and foremost, but delivering in a way that people feel like they can rely on you. That's it.
It's an interesting thing talking about, and Cam mentioning the marketing. People never see how the sausage is made with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
You could transpose that to what you're doing now with Inglorious Treksperts. We were talking off air before this started about the rigorous schedule you guys are keeping at the moment with the conventions that you're doing, or the appearances you're making. But then there's also the hours of marketing, editing, all the stuff that goes into just making one podcast of the other podcasts that you do.
Yeah.
Which you could look at us from the same perspective. You never see that side of things, what goes into it. It's almost like the swan image, isn't it? It's like the elegance up the top, and you're just paddling away furiously at the bottom.
Yeah,
and it's great to hear someone be honest about that approach, because some people have come on here before and been like, "Yeah, it was just luck." No,
yeah,
there's work. There's work.
There's a lot of work. The thing is, though, I used to say that I fell out of the sky with a job as though it were luck. It took a lot of therapy for me to go, wait a minute. It's not about blowing my own horn. It's about owning process, right? And getting to a place where I could say, no, there was no magic involved in what happened. There was a lot of effort involved in what happened. And, I talk to a lot of writers. I do Austin Film Festival almost every year, I do panels. I'm part of the Writers Guild Foundation Veterans Mentorship Program, and I pride myself on straight talk about this stuff because I will never forget when I decided I wanted to be a writer. I would go to conventions every once in a blue moon. There was somebody who was a writer on a show or a producer on a show, and people would ask them. I would never ask questions. I wasn't that guy, believe it or not. They would ask them questions about the business and all of this, and the answers were always the fluffiest bullshit you can imagine. They weren't useful in any way. I went to a Gallifrey my first year that I was in LA, which is the Doctor Who convention. I had no idea why I went. I don't like Doctor Who. I'm sorry if you love Doctor Who. I get it. It's not my, forgive me, cup of tea. But at the convention, there were a couple of writers, and I think like the Zickeries were there. And, there was all of this stuff about like, oh, well, Hollywood is really looking for your unique and special voice. And I remember thinking, we aren't. No one is. That's not true. You're filling these people with false hope. You're not telling them the things they need to succeed. They might be brilliant, and you're giving them nothing that they can use. Give them things they can use, right? So I'm a big believer in acknowledging the work and owning the work, and breaking down all those things that we have to do to be successful, to maintain success, and not ascribing the good things or the bad things to magic. It's like stuff happens, man. Luck is now I'm on my soapbox, but at least in the context of this business, luck is simply being prepared to recognize an opportunity and take advantage of it when it comes. That's it. That's what all the work is for. You cannot predict when the opportunity will arise. You can only prepare for the opportunity to arise so that when it does arise, you know it for what it is. Right? When Robert came in and he said, I'm going to buy this from you guys and you can come in and pitch. My mama didn't raise no dummies except for, oh, my sister's okay. But she didn't really raise any dummies, I mean, I knew what that meant. I was like, okay, we're going to go for this. We're going to go. And we're going to go hard. And it worked.
Well, I think that actually pivots us over very beautifully to the film in question, because it sounded like it needed a little bit of work when you stepped aboard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's X-Men First Class. But just to sort of dip our feet into this whole situation, before X-Men First Class had come along, there'd been some X-Men films, I think about 4 or 5 by that point. How familiar were you with those films and just with X-Men as sort of a comic book series?
Extremely familiar. Extremely familiar. I have been a comic book collector since I was, I want to say 11 years old. Whenever I've moved, the security, safety, and verifiable completeness of my comic book collection is number one at the top of my list of concerns. I mean, if we lose a child, it's sad. I've got 3. I've got spares. I don't really need them all, but keeping one would be great. The comics, totally different deal. I want to say that I've probably got about 100,000 of them at this point.
Wow.
They basically have their own wing in the house. When I moved out to Dallas from LA back in May, June of 2021, and I pulled out a bunch of stuff that I took with me when I drove, because I had to drive my Scotch collection because you can't take it on, you can't like ship it, which is annoying. And I pulled out stuff like, oh, here's a couple of different sets of the original Dark Knight Returns miniseries. Here are 3 mint condition, first issue, like Wolverine #1.
Right.
Right? Like boom, boom, boom. So yeah, I knew X-Men for sure. And in fact, now technically, technically, I shouldn't talk about this, but Zach let this cat out of the bag, and I don't think it matters anymore. At the time that we were hired to turn First Class into a movie from a cluster film, we were already working on an X-Men movie that nobody's ever seen. It was an in case of emergency break glass development project that was that combined the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Daredevil. It was everybody
Oh
that
wow.
that Fox had the rights to, and we had come up with a fairly clever, crazy way into adapting the Civil War storyline using all of those characters. Deadpool was in it. We were, we were off to script at that point, and then we got the call on X-Men,
Okay.
and then
And just in terms of the timeline, at this, you write Thor that comes out right around X-Men. Where in the sort of the timeline is Thor versus X-Men First Class?
Okay, so Thor we got on the heels of the writer's strike ending. Marvel was up against the wall in terms of their production schedule. They originally intended Thor to come out in May of 2010,
Mm-hmm.
and the clock was ticking away. Okay, so this was late 2008 or something like that. Yeah, that's right, late 2008. And it was a very scary time. And they started looking for writers to come in and get it ready to rock and roll. And what they hoped for was television writers who hopefully knew genre, who hopefully knew comic books, who hopefully knew Thor. I got a call from our agent who said, "Oh, so here's what's going on. Do you know anything about Thor?" I said, "Well, I've got a print of the cover of Thor 337 where Beta Ray Bill is breaking the logo and Walt Simonson signed it. Does that make me a Thor fan?" Like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, cool. So we got that gig, which was amazing and a whole other story, but it was fantastic. Now, the weirdly enough, Thor got us in to Fox, but not in the way you would expect because nobody had seen the film.
Yeah.
So we went to meet with the executive who was in charge of the X-Men properties. And he was like, I'm there to sort of find something to do with you guys, and it was interesting because we had been up for X-Men First Class when the job first popped,
Mm-hmm.
but we had refused to let anybody read Thor. Right? That's what they wanted to read before they gave us that job. And we said no. Our agent begged us. We said no, absolutely not. So the executive, who eventually became a really good friend, said, "So I just got a question for you guys. Why wouldn't you let us read Thor? I mean, to get X-Men. I mean, why wouldn't you do that?" And I said, "Well, let me ask you this. If you had entrusted us with the family jewels, as it were, uh, and you said, don't show anyone, don't share it with anyone. And it is critical, right, to your bottom line that you protect this property at all costs. And we say, sure, we'll do that. We'll protect it. We'll help you. And then we go off, and the next thing you hear is that we let somebody else look at it to get a job, even if it was, oh, we sat outside your office while you read a hard copy and then you gave it back to us. How would you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I would be upset. I said, exactly. I said, so nobody was allowed to read it. We didn't let you read it, and we still would. And he said, okay. So cut to a few weeks later, I'm headed off on vacation with my wife. First vacation in years. Land. We went to Rome. I think she was Good Lord, was she pregnant? I guess she was. Sorry, this is old home week for me. I told you about the PTSD. It's a time machine. Uh, Landed in Rome, and I get to the hotel, and the hotel's fax machine, we're back to fax machines, had been blowing up with faxes for me and messages, uh, basically saying, "Oh my God, call Zach, call the agency, and here's an NDA." I'm like, "What is this for?" I had no idea. So I get up to the room and I call into this call. Found out that Zach had been sitting outside the office of the president of Fox, right? President of 20th, and get on this call, get in this meeting, and it was, so here's what we're doing, and it was that project that I told you about. And when I talked to the executive, Drew Gravello, later, he said, yeah, he said, we gave you that job because of your answer about the Thor script.
Wow.
When you told me that, I knew I could trust you. I knew you could write. Now I know I can trust you. It's like, okay. So, it was weird. We were, that was 2000. Sweet Lord. When was that? No, that was 2010. She wasn't pregnant. That was 2010. My God, guys. This is like really taking me back. But Thor, in the intervening time, had been delayed by a year for production. So, which is why they landed within 30 days of each other. So Thor definitely led to X-Men. It was in a very roundabout way that had to do with, answering a trick question correctly.
Right.
Mm.
It was the morality test, and we passed it.
It makes you wonder, knowing that script is in the ether, not the actual ether, but in the mystical ether, as it were. And there is now about to be a Fox Marvel multiverse, everything happens all at once film.
Mm-hmm.
One wonders if some of those concepts might just magically appear or get used somehow.
It could, but the thing is that, look, I think when you're talking about comic movies particularly, and when you are a super nerd like I am, a lot of those basic things end up finding their way. They find their way into the material simply by virtue of having a common source. If you're dealing with writers, with creators, with filmmakers, God, I hate that word, who all speak the common language, right? And we have a common background. It's like, what that means, right? But we had a very different take on some things, but a very specific kind of way of looking at it. The attitude that we brought to it was very ultimate universe versus 616. So there was a lot of that stuff. We had a really fun scene where Reed Richards is trying to bring in Wolverine, and he cuts his arms off. It was awesome. But it's just, there's all kinds of crazy stuff like that. I mean, there's things that could potentially show up. I mean, we had Sentinels, we had all kinds of madness. And if it shows up, I'm willing to bet that 99.9% chance it's because it's all coming from the same pool of material.
Right. Okay. And so with First Class, it had gone through a few writers. Bryan Singer, I believe, was on board at the time you're hired to direct.
Mm-hmm.
What is sort of the state of the script? Like, what are they dealing with in terms of the story then versus ultimately what the audience knows?
Okay. So on paper, there had been a few writers ahead of us, except kind of not really. David Goyer, then Sheldon Turner had worked on a project called I, Magneto, which was supposed to be the X-Men Origins Magneto film. And it was basically, Magneto Nazi hunter. That was the movie. And there had been a couple of attempts. I think Josh Schwartz was the most notable among them to do First Class, but a more direct adaptation of First Class, of the comic book. And none of those things went. because they all had problems, and almost to the point where it's not even relevant to talk about what the problems were, with those scripts and with those projects. They just didn't go anywhere because they ultimately didn't work. And Brian came in, and it was Brian who really laid out the fundamental story of that movie, which was what you saw, right? That was his vibe. That was his basic setup. That's what he wanted out of it. And they hired, oh dear Lord, why is my brain blanking? The writer who came in and did the first draft. Oh my
Is
God.
it Jamie Moss?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I know it was Jamie something, and Moss was eluding me. Jamie Moss comes in, writes a draft. And look, how to put it. This job, it can be very difficult. And if you are a baby writer, as we say, there are aspects of it that are nearly impossible. One of the benefits of working in television is you get to see things happen and things get made and sit through notes processes and break things down and beat things out and watch dailies come in and watch edits come in and give notes on cuts, to the point where there's a vast difference in the confidence of a television writer taking notes and dealing with the development process and a baby feature writer sitting in that same process. A baby feature writer doesn't understand some things that a TV writer does, which is that the best way to scare the shit out of your executive is to include dialogue they pitched you in the script. I know that sounds counterintuitive. You think, oh, they would like that. They don't like it, right? Because it can be directly traced back to them. It does not reduce their anxiety. It also says that you're being a typist. That draft. So we got a call from the studio, from our executive, Drew, and he said, guys, I want you to come in. There's something I want you to read. Don't call your reps. Don't tell them what's going on. I just want you to come in and read. He said, oh, okay. So I went in, I got there first. He pitched out the concept to me. I thought that was the best effing idea I had ever heard. I said, I can't wait to read this. And I read it. Zach comes in. Drew tells him nothing and just hands him the script to see if our reactions are different. And our reactions were a little different. For example, Zach's response was, well, it needs a lot of work, but this idea is good and this idea is good. And I said, and I was basically like, what the is this shit? And just excoriating this thing and everything that was wrong with it and why. Because I was comparing it to the glory of the original idea. The fundamental thing that was wrong with it, is that first draft, all of its other issues aside, was about the premise was, what if in the 1960s Professor X had hair? That was the primary difference. He's got hair.
Very compelling.
Very compelling. And so the characters are exactly as we knew them in the first 3 films, plus, I guess at that point, X-Men Origins Wolverine had come out, so this was the 5th film, technically. They were exactly as we knew them, exactly as they had been described, except not great. A little more Last Stand than, I could tell you stories about that too, but a little more Last Stand than, say, X2 or X-Men 2000. And it was just wrong. It was just fundamentally wrong. I think if there was any creative choice of consequence that we made about that script, it was that this movie needs to be about these guys. It's not about Professor X and Magneto. It's about Charles and Eric. And it's about their bromance. They're 2 kids from different sides of the tracks. And they could come together and be together forever in happiness, except for the things that they don't say to each other, and they really need to, right? And Charles is feckless. He uses his great speech about mutation from X-Men 2000 that opens up that movie as as a pickup line. That's where he is. That's his level of seriousness. And Eric is just this focused laser beam of rage, and it is about his rage. And that over time, we need to broaden Charles' perspective on what his power means and what can be done with it and his responsibility to the world. And that, the expansion of his telepathy, his ability to touch minds everywhere, has a profound effect on how he sees himself and how he sees everybody. He sees an interconnectedness. And the speech stops being a pickup line and it becomes about something greater. And even Eric undergoes that transformation, but it's tinged with that rage and that hate that he has with him at the very beginning of the film. It's the thing that he cannot get past because of the things that he can't say. But he does awaken to the idea that it's not just about him, right? He does, in fact, go through a positive change arc, as we say in the business. He is no longer just about Eric. He is no longer just about his revenge. In his mind, he is about protecting people like him. He is about never again. That is the key line for him. That's his moment of revelation. And we had to get those guys to that point, right? And that was not anywhere at all in that first draft. It simply wasn't. It was just in the 60s, and there was Mystique, and there was Beast, and there was blah, blah, blah. And it happened.
Okay, so that's the setup then.
Yeah.
That's the state of affairs when you walk into the room and you're both shown the same script from different angles.
Yep.
I'm assuming you both go, yes, we'll take a punt at it. Your next step, I guess, would be to write a treatment, but you've also got other people at play here because you've got Bryan Singer attached. You've got, I'm guessing, Lauren Schuler-Donner's in here somewhere as well, giving notes about this, involved in the production. Where are these names coming into the conversation, and what are their thoughts of where the script is and where it needs to go?
Look, everybody, and I'm smiling because you guys are going to need a drink when I'm done with this story. Everybody involved in this process knew that they were fucked.
Okay.
They just knew it. 100%. That was not a makeable script. It was an emergency because, Rothman, and he's cool, had announced the film and had announced that Bryan was going to direct it. It wouldn't have been that bad, except that Bryan got pulled back by Warner Brothers to do Jack the Giant Killer, which he didn't really want to do, but it threw everything into disarray. And it suddenly put a clock on the process. They needed to get a film they could greenlight. Like, there was a date certain after which the rights would revert to Marvel. And there was no way that Rothman was going to let that happen, right? Unless it was simply a movie that he could not make. And that, by the way, is why we were working on that other movie. So we had, from the moment that we were hired, so we finished reading, and our executive says, right, don't tell your reps. We had this conversation. They'll get a call tonight, and we'll move forward from there. So 6 p.m. comes along. Suddenly, reps are calling us. We just got the craziest call from Fox PA. 45 minutes later, they closed a deal.
Wow.
Okay. Understand, when I think my record on closing a deal for length was for Big Trouble in Little China back in 2016. That took a tick over 9 months to do that deal. 45 minutes. 30 minutes later, I was in my car. I was headed into Hollywood to meet Zach and Bryan Singer for sushi to talk about the state of the script while I'm driving. Okay, this is where the Spy Hearts, I think you guys would appreciate this because it basically turned into fucking Alias. Our executive gets on the phone and just, and he's like, so here's the thing, boys. The chairman needs a script that he can greenlight. He has very specific expectations and needs for this script, and I am going to communicate them to you. He said, however, he also needs Bryan to be happy. If Brian is not happy, even if the chairman is happy, then we will not greenlight a script, because the chairman believes that if Brian isn't behind it, that the movie will die and it won't be successful. He said, the problem is they don't agree on everything. And we're like, oh, okay. So suddenly he was our handler. And we were in this weird situation between the studio and Brian in the development of this rewrite, which was page one, like, as they say, not even a comma was left, because there couldn't be. Sat down with Brian, and dinner, I never forget Brian giving this speech. He's like, do you want to know why writers get fired off of big franchise projects like this one? It's because you listen to those people, the enemies of creativity. And he starts listing them. If you want to stay on this, if you want to succeed, you need to listen to me. And I was like, okay, cool. Listen, we're not typists. We're not just going to take notes and sit down and go and just send it back to them, right? It's like, we had a really great conversation about all that stuff. And as he was preparing to say goodnight, jump into his Porsche and drive away, he says, well, the way I see it, you've worked in television, you're a team, I give you a 50-50 chance of pulling this off. Then he gets in his car and he drives away.
Wow, what a confidence stamp there.
Oh my God. We had 10 days.
What?
We had 10 days. We spent the next day breaking the story, beating it out, fixing the structure, deciding things like everything I just pitched to you about Charles and Eric. We had to come up with the next day.
Yeah.
And then kind of work out, okay, what's this, and this. Get that approved by the studio. Get Brian to kind of sign off. That was easy, because everybody's like, Jesus Christ, this is not the time to screw with them. And then we started writing like crazy people. And our agreement with the studio was to send in pages as we went.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, by the way, I wrote the Argentina scene blind drunk, like, I'm not exaggerating, 5 martinis in at about 12:30 at night. And we shot it 99% word for word.
Wow.
It's just like, it was just desperation. So we sent those pages in. We were working forward and figuring stuff out and kind of fixing it as we went. Started to get notes from the studio. Get notes from Brian too. And by the way we handled Brian in the studio was we figured out pretty quickly that if we told the studio that Brian really wanted it this way, and if we told Brian that, well, the chairman really wants this, we could get whatever we wanted. It was, I mean, come on. It's like, I was a middle kid. I know how to play my parents. And like I said, it's like, see, it's just like Alias, right? It's like, what's the line? There's the counter line. There's the mission and the counter mission.
There's also I just appreciate the fact that you were 5 martinis in. The Bond influences in this film and also in the writing process is coming through. I like that.
100%. I'm a huge Bond fan. But yeah, it was absolutely, it was, there was, I mean, Bond does everything better when he's had a couple martinis, and that's just how I roll. We were getting notes on the first act, I think the Wednesday before it was due, right? With like 2 days left to go. We had the first act. We had about half of the second act. We were starting to dive into the third and kind of but didn't quite have it like even figured out entirely like what it needed to be, other than here are the beats. And the Wednesday before the Friday we had to turn it in, I get a message from Zach, and he's like, hey, Drew has more notes on the first act. I said, does he? I said, and Zach was working at the studio. That was his workspace. I was working at home. I said, does he? I said, tell you what. I said, you get Drew on the phone. Let's talk about him. So everybody gets on the phone. I said, Drew. I said, I looked at your notes. I said, they're very sane. They're very good. I don't really have any problem with any of them. I said, here's my problem. My problem is it's Wednesday. We turn this in, close of business on Friday. We have a great first act. We're sort of into the second act. Haven't figured out the details of Act 3 yet. Which means that if we stop everything to do your notes on the first act, on Friday, we will have a great first act. I said, Drew, is the chairman going to greenlight a great first act? And he said, no, he's not. I said, no, he's not going to greenlight a great first act. It means that we will have failed. I said, but here's the thing. Everybody expects us to fail. Our bar is failure. It's like the story about the dog that gets up on its hind legs. It's not how long he stays up there. It's that the little bastard got up there at all. So when we fail on Friday, everybody's going to say, guys, you gave it your all. You know, we had this unreasonable expectation. Thank you for trying. You worked your hearts out. It's not your fault. I said, but it's going to need to be somebody's fault, Drew. I said, do you know whose fault it's going to be? It's going to be yours, bud. It's going to be your fault. Your head will roll when we only turn in a first act. Now, let me ask you something. Would you like us to do the notes on the first act or continue writing? And he said, I would love it if you continue writing.
And you're telling me you're a parent?
Yes.
I think I know where you got that from. Okay.
Yeah, it was like that was a little bit of the old middle school teacher coming out. I'm giving you some choices that you're going to be responsible for. You tell me which one you would like. You know, you can keep talking, but then you are choosing to move tables, right?
Right.
Then when Friday came around, we still did not have the third act. Like we knew what needed to happen in it, but there's a difference between knowing what needs to happen in it and what happens. Like, okay, so the X-Men are going to Cuba. And it's not like The Godfather Part 3. They're hunting for a submarine. Jesus Christ, how the fuck do they find a submarine? I had nothing. I had been up all night. Dude, we were pulling, I think in those 10 days, we did something like between us, well over 400 hours.
Wow.
Of work. And I was at my wit's end. I had maybe 2 hours of sleep. I was up early. And Zach chimed in. I was like, dude, I said, I got nothing. I'm going to get a shower. I was like, I felt defeat. I go up, I get in the shower, and my brain is just turning on. How do the X-Men find a fucking submarine? I'm in the water. I'm in the water. And all of a sudden, boom, got out of the shower, ran out of my computer. I was like, Banshee, he's fucking sonar. And I was like, I'll pitch it to Drew. And 2 seconds later, he loves it. I was like, okay. So for about 3 hours, I sat. It was like, if you've ever seen Romancing the Stone, you know, the very beginning when she's typing and she's crying, it was that for 3 hours, jamming out what I would say 60, 70% became the third act that you saw in that film of just like a crazy person getting that script done and sending it in. And by the way, they cut our time short because Brian had just the night before run into Matthew Vaughn at a steakhouse and said, you know, we're doing this movie, but I can't direct it. Maybe you'd be interested. So Matthew wanted to read it when it was ready, but his flight was leaving at like 3 p.m. So, we lost, a good quarter of the day. It is still one of the most insane writing experiences of my existence. And then we had to do it again. Like for the second draft, it was another thing where we had like 10 days. Now it wasn't a page one then, but it was still a lot of work and had its own set of crazy shit. But dude, it's like, it was unlike anything. I've never heard another writer tell me a story anywhere close to as nutso as what that was.
That's incredible. Was the collection of characters intact when you joined the project, or were you figuring out which characters to incorporate as well?
A lot of them had been figured out. We kept the choices that we liked. There was some shuffling that went on as we figured out. I mean, look, the issues you have to consider are, is there power cinematic?
Mm-hmm.
Because the chairman didn't like heroes who just punched things. Do the powers work compatibly with what everybody else is doing? Let me tell you something. As a writer, you have not lived until you have attempted to write a battle scene with like 10 Omega level mutants trying to kill each other and make that make any sense at all. Like why it isn't over in the first 3 seconds. Like that is the hardest part. We had to consider that. Then we had to consider producibility. I mean, and then we had to think about canon because we were shifting a lot of these characters backwards in time. So there were some things that were off the table, like, and we ended up doing weird shit. Like Havoc is in the 60s, even though technically, he's the younger brother. He's not the older brother in the comics. And at that point, man, when you've got 10 fucking, you can't even think about that. Nobody's even pitching. What if it's Vulcan? No, nobody cares about Vulcan. It doesn't matter. It's going to be Havoc. It is what it is. Some of those things switched out, like Sunspot was going to be in it. And then that got switched to his dad. But the designs didn't change other than the designs of the powers. I love the idea of Sunspot. It was just not producible in the time and the money that existed. I mean, all kinds of things. One of the things that we really just hit on that we loved was the Mystique Beast connection and that relationship. It's funny, in the original script, they were dating, but they were just dating, and it wasn't about anything. And there was no particular connection between Mystique and Charles. And that really turned into, oh, this is a key relationship. This is a parallel that's running between Charles and Eric. It's between Hank and Raven, and their attitudes towards who they are, and how Hank's view of Raven's dilemma leads to a horrifying consequence for him, and also ends their relationship because he fundamentally misunderstands what it is that she wants, which is pretty much the story of being male on this planet. All of those decisions were primarily, though, driven by what is dramatic and interesting. And a lot of the arguments were about what's dramatic and interesting and what makes sense for those characters. We had a couple of note sessions with Brian once the script went in, and I had an argument with Brian about Mystique. And by the way, Brian likes argument. When you push back, he knows you're serious. And there was a thing I can't remember what it was, but it was very like, and then Mystique fights some people and all this other shit. I said, Brian, the deal with Mystique is not that she beats people up. I mean, sure, she can. But the deal with Mystique is that she is an infiltrator. The suspense comes from the fact that she's never done it before. She's just a kid. She's never done it before. She's not a trained killer, professional spy. She's none of those things. She's kind of making it up as she goes along. We should be afraid for her, even though she's got this cool power. He said, oh yeah, you know what? You're right. That's how we need to play that. So there were a lot of conversations about that stuff and how that needed to work.
I feel like I've got loads of questions about like the minutia of the script and like how it came to be. And I feel like there's like X-Men fans, ghostly X-Men fans behind me with tons of questions that maybe I'll get into. But I feel like I want to follow the narrative that we're hearing about how you dealt with it, because you had that deadline, that 10-day, 9.5 by the sounds of it, really. Yep. And I think a lot of I'll give you a break from talking for a second, just so you can have a drink and sort of share a little bit about maybe I think where your success from that comes from is your time in TV. I've spent so many years reading about TV writers, specifically Star Trek writers. I'll call back to the 50-Year Mission, Mark Altman, Edward Gross's really great book series about Star Trek. And, you talk about the writers' rooms for the sort of Rick Berman era and the crunch that they were in week after week. I think they had 2 weeks off per year. 50 weeks of the year you're sitting in a writer's room writing stories and continuously chugging through it and not having a break and continuously having to be creative. That's the key.
Mm-hmm.
And so you put under that pressure. You made a diamond out of it. You excelled under that pressure, clearly. What I want to find out now is you've handed it off, and Matthew Vaughn's just appeared on the scene now in this story. And I've read some quotes about Matthew Vaughn in this film that I want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there yet, I don't think, though. So Matthew Vaughn's materialized. He's just flown on a jet plane, probably back to England. I mean, I've interviewed the guy in person. I've met Matthew. He's been nothing but fine to me, but I don't know about other things. But Matthew appears. You've handed it in. What's the feedback you're getting on this 10-day script you've handed in?
First of all, I think everybody was just astonished that it was even a complete script, that it got to fade out and it wasn't, and then some shit happens, that we had actually, beat for beat. It was a complete screenplay.
Mhm.
So there was that. Again, back to the parable of the little dog who gets up on his hind feet. Rothman's notes, and he was notorious for being brutal, were great. His notes were great. And he was the one in that very first draft. Wolverine did not appear because we were told that we could not use him. But he read that first draft and he said, find a way to do a cameo. And thus, Go Fuck Yourselves was born as just a quick way of having him in the movie and out.
It's brilliant. Like, I remember seeing it in theaters and the audience just exploded.
And it was so much fun to write. And actually, when the movie came out, I was in Hollywood. I was going to see a completely different movie with my wife and some friends. And on Hollywood Boulevard, they've got all the cosplayers, right? And there was the Wolverine cosplayer. And as I go by, he says, "Got a light, bub?" And I said, "Go fuck yourself." I was like, yes, it works. I felt a little bad, but he'll get that eventually as soon as he sees the movie. And then he'll go, oh, yeah. Wow, okay. No, I think definitely TV was great prep. I mean, the thing you learn in television is anybody can have a great pitch. You need to have 9 great pitches. And you need to be prepared to watch them all die. But you also need to be able to make decisions quickly, because sometimes you just don't have any time. And that is just the experience of looking at scenes and understanding what works in a scene and what doesn't, and getting a feel for how this stuff is ultimately going to come together and how it won't. And there is no substitute for that experience. There's none at all. In terms of being able to do this stuff quickly and have it be producible and something that people are going to greenlight.
So what about in terms of Matthew Vaughn, his senior, your draft, and how is that sort of continuing in the ongoing evolution of the script?
So when we were working on the second draft, or the next iteration, it was primarily the notes from the chairman.
Mm-hmm.
And, others kind of weighed in. It was, Simon and Lauren Schiller Donner, and they had some notes, but mainly their notes were, holy shit. It just, I mean, come on. And a couple of questions to clarify things as we kind of went into the next draft. We had almost no time for that too, because they were busy, feeling out Matthew and then negotiating with Matthew, and nobody was going to try to get notes from Matthew or thoughts from Matthew until they had a deal with him. The context you have to bear in mind is that he had screwed Fox before.
Yeah.
On The Last Stand. He, prepped Last Stand, and he walked off 3 weeks before the beginning of principal photography. The movie that we got is the movie that he prepped. That was his movie. That was just the one that Ratner, made. I mean, say what you want about Ratner. I will say that anybody who says, okay, so you've got this movie, it was prepped and it was all written, I'm not going to be part of the development process. I'm stuck with all the design choices and everything else. And I start shooting in 3 weeks. Sure, I'll do it. You have got balls of steel and my eternal respect for standing up and doing that. I mean, the movie's a disaster and I hate it. Or as Brian said when we were talking to him about Magneto in the script, he's like, you put years of work into creating a character like Magneto who's nuanced, who has experienced trauma and tragedy and has a very particular attitude about things, and suddenly it becomes pods go first. And you're like, oh yeah, that is wrong and effed up. You're right. In many ways, First Class was an attempt to undo Last Stand. I mean, there's a whole other side story I could tell you about how we originally had Destiny in it and tried to do some shit with that, but that's neither here nor there. because it doesn't matter. Matthew came in. They did his deal in like 10 days. Basically, the day that I was finishing up the second draft, and we had another 10 days to do all the notes and kind of get in, and the big task was massaging that third act and a couple of other things. And I remember Zach had a wedding to go to, and he got stomach flu. So for the last couple of days of that process, he was completely out. I was exhausted. I, was running late. Like we were supposed to turn it in on the Sunday that night, and it wasn't done yet. And the studio called our manager and was just breathing down her neck about it. And she said, basically, you assholes. I was like, do you have any idea what you're asking them to do? And she's like, okay, honey, how soon can you have it? I said, 2 a.m. She said, okay. So they're, hey, you know what? That's fair. All right, 2 a.m. I turn this thing in, maybe 2:30. Go to sleep. I get maybe 3 hours of sleep before my phone rings. And it's Drew. He says, hey, I just read the draft. Great job. We're all super happy. He says, I have a question for you. I said, oh, God. Yeah, I mean, yes. And he says, do you think that you guys would be able to travel to London and do more work on the script with Matthew Vaughn? I said, yeah, sure. Trip to London. That sounds great. He said, awesome. Well, you'll probably be leaving tonight. I'm just, yeah, you'll probably be leaving tonight. So all of a sudden, those arrangements were being made. Understand, I have at this point a baby who is 8, 9 months old. First kid. And my wife was like, what? And it was open-ended. It was gonna be like 3 weeks, maybe more, going to London. Leaving her, I called my mom. I said, Mom, can you come out? My mom landed at LAX about the same time that I was taking off. So I could go out to London. Slept the whole flight. Woke up. I was in London. It was magic. Took a 45-minute ride into the city in Mar Films. Went and had our first meeting with Matthew. By the way, when that meeting was done, went back, went to bed, slept another 13 hours. I was just that destroyed. So walked into Marv, go up to their top floor where they've got everybody sort of sitting in the conference room, and they've got notes written around and all this other shit. And another thing you need to know about Matthew is that he also, years before, had walked off the last version of Thor.
Yeah.
Right? Again, really close to production. They'd gone through this whole development process and all this shit. And so we walk in, and the first thing Matthew says to us is, oh, you're the chaps who rewrote my Thor script. I said, actually, we're the chaps who threw your Thor script out and wrote a completely different one. And he looks at me and he goes, I'm going to like you. And they kind of took us through some of their thoughts on some of the action and some other shit, and I was like, okay, let me pitch this back to you. And it was just, and he's like, okay, you guys clearly know what you're doing. Here's all the stuff we want to do. Here's all this other shit. Like, go off and and start writing. And we spent 3 weeks in London working on that movie. We went home, and then we were still writing action scenes and doing all this other stuff, catch can for them while they were prepping. It was all crazy all the time. I mean, that was altogether probably 3 months of my life. It felt like a year. Just bananas, man.
Did you get to see any of London whilst you were here, at least?
I did. I got to see the inside of St. Martin's Lane and St. Martin's Lane, which wasn't bad. No, I mean,
nice part of town. Sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I got to go to Trafalgar Square and went to the to the museum and sort of went to the palace and sort of saw stuff from the outside. We didn't have a lot of time. Mainly, it was sitting and it was working. The best part was when I was flying in, and I was going through customs, and there's a very nice old lady who was there, and she asked me why I was traveling to the United Kingdom. I said, well, I'm working. So what are you working on? I'm like, well, I'm working on the new X-Men. She goes, oh, it's like she had sort of heard about that. And so she raises her stamp and then she stops and she looks at me and she says, "You're not recasting Hugh Jackman, are you?" I said, "Oh no, ma'am." And she says, "Good. Welcome to the United Kingdom." It's like, yeah. So, that was like, the Brady's Go to London, special that happened with us. It made no sense. It made no sense at all.
So at what point does Goldman and Matthew Vaughn write, a draft of the script themselves?
So the truth of the matter is that we were all writing on that script.
Okay.
Once we were in it and once we were in prep and writing through prep. I think, even Simon wrote some scenes and all that other stuff. So it was constantly whatever. Because once you're in prep and once you start casting and once you start realizing that, oh, we need to swap out this mutant or that mutant, or oh, hey, I just had like, a different idea, right? Then you start writing that, like, oh, if they land on the beach and Magneto is gonna go and kill Shaw, what's Charles doing? And I was like, oh, it's the end of the Dark Knight. He's Lucius Fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, but instead of the sonar, he's using his mental powers to go, okay, he's turn right, turn left, he's this, it's that, watch out for this. And then that kind of gives him a front row seat to all the horrible shit that happens. I feel like the entire exchange on the beach was all written while we were in London. That everything between them about, their friendship, their relationship, and the action that happens there. The never again. I've been at the mercy of men who were just following orders. Never again. Like that all happened while we were writing in London. I drew, and I still have them. I would draw, and I want to do this, but I kept it for X-Men. I drew diagrams for the third act battle, like, and I phased it out. Like, here's the sub, here's where the Blackbird comes in. Here's where they land on the beach, and then here's the fights, and here's all of this stuff over time, and then how this all links up. Like, it looks like a crazy person did it, but it was the map that we basically followed in writing this, and in doing that, we are able to make some sense and break it down. I mean, those were the kinds of things that we were doing. By the way, if you've ever been to St. Martin's Lane, on St. Martin's Lane, you would know that it is not the kind of place that you want to stay at if you're trying to get work done. It's the kind of place you go if, you want to go to a bar and,
Mm-hmm.
be single. It's it's just a odd, odd little thing.
Well, that's just really interesting, though, to hear you talk about the collaboration going on, because I feel like that's part of the narrative of the development of this movie that's kind of been lost. When you read about it, so much of what is reported online is more of a passing from team to team, as opposed to a group of people working together to get it to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it was sort of a pass from team to team. There's a point where you're in prep and you're so far along in prep, and you have like Simon or you have us, and we're so far removed from it that it's just like it's just suddenly Jane at her typewriter, and not her typewriter, but at her computer, and so that kind of happens. And that's just the nature of the beast. And then you've got somebody who's sitting on set. I'm assuming that was Jane. And writing is happening on set as you're constantly reacting to the realities of the production. No plan survives the first engagement with the enemy, right? And or as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And you get punched in the face on a daily basis when you're making a movie. But no, it was semi-permeable. I think that's maybe the best way to put it.
Okay, and I did have a question, because Sheldon Turner got a credit because of the Magneto screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that something you were looking at, the Magneto screenplay, or was it more just because there was ideas that were carried over?
Because there were ideas that were carried over. However, um, there was a scene from I, Magneto that Matthew and Jane lifted, and I forget which one it was. It might have been the banker scene. but they lifted it like word for word, and they put it into that script, which really gave Sheldon a very strong kind of claim on the credit. And Matthew, and not to tell tales out of school, but there was an interview where Matthew was like, "Oh, I've never like, seen this draft and all these other things, and who are these people and all this other shit." And Zach and I were at MCA, right? Is that at the commission that's in Britain? They all run together for me, and we were doing a panel on the movie, and there was a reporter who asked us, like, well, what do you think about like what Matthew said about, how, well, he like wrote this whole movie on that. So, well, I said, it's funny. I said, and I went through a whole list, but the kicker was the Sheldon Turner. I said, I think Matthew was taken out of context or misquoted because Sheldon Turner, who wrote a draft of Bad Magneto, wrote, the scene, the banker scene. I could show it to you. I could sit down, I could show you, go, oh my God, word for word. I said, and Matthew's a very smart man. He would know that he saw that. So he was clearly misquoted and taken out of context. The thing is, though, it's just, and here we are, like being maybe too candid for my own good. But Matthew is, I think, a brilliant producer.
Yeah.
Like a truly brilliant producer.
Definitely.
And usually he's got excellent taste in material. I think sometimes his sense of discipline flees him. And you get the first Kingsman sequel, right? But I think that he's got great taste, generally, unless he gets caught up in the unrelenting fabulousness of what he's doing. And he's a great producer. But there is a thing that he does. For example, he was like, well, I set up and I lit all of those shots. And I mean, like, there was almost not a thing, that Matthew was not taking credit for on that film. And without saying anything else or naming names, I know a lot of people who worked on that movie. And I believe that they would give you a very, very different story of how things went down. And again, I don't want to take anything away from him. I was excited to work with him, because of Kick-Ass. If nothing else, that movie was amazing. And it just he was good to us, while we were there. There's some other stuff I could offline, but it's just, look, in this business, ego is a very large part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very large part of it. Insecurity, anxiety, it's all a very large part of it. And at some point, you either let go of that and acknowledge the realities that are around you, or you let that consume you. Okay. And how a person responds and whether they're rewarded for it or punished for it, it's really kind of, it's a crapshoot. It's anybody's guess how they're going to handle it. And it's a difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing to handle. It's scary to acknowledge that what you're doing requires work and effort and that you can fail. It's scary to acknowledge that you are dependent upon the talents, the skills, the wisdom of others, right? It's scary to say, hey, you know what? I look forward to notes because somebody might say something that's really brilliant and changes everything and makes it better. And it is very scary, incredibly scary, and yet so rewarding to give credit. This is kind of beyond the scope really of X-Men First Class, but one of the things that I've come to in the intervening years is when I meet with producers, directors, executives, what have you, when they pitch me something, and maybe at first I don't like it, but I'll talk to them about it and I'll ask them about it. I'll get them to engage me on it. And if something comes out of it that I think is good, right? Like I internalize it and then I can pitch it out. Something that I think is really good and I really like it, I give it to them. So you know what? That was a great idea that you had. But that's a scary thing to do. And again, like when people feel, I know, look, when I felt that pressure, it 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 drives us. It drove me at times to not want to be generous or magnanimous because there's a fear at the heart of everything we do, and that fear is just it's poison. It's poison. It doesn't help.
Right.
It doesn't help at all. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not somebody is talented and whether or not they can do the job. I would never take away Matthew's talent from him or his contributions away from him. I actually have enormous respect for him in spite of some professional frustrations. You work in a situation like that, you get frustrated. Not everybody's going to be your best friend when you come out of it.
Oh, totally.
I can only speak to, and maybe this will close the book on the Matthew Vaughn side of this, and maybe we can get into a bit more of the granularity of X-Men. When I interviewed him at the beginning of this year about Argyle, he spoke to me off air about the quote at the front of the Argyle book that they released, and it said, "The best spy thriller since Ian Fleming." Quote, Matthew Vaughn. Now, he said to me, he said that jokingly at a press pundit, and then that was put on the front of every single book, and he was then told that that was verbatim what he said, and he was held to it by every other interview he was faced with and quizzed on. And he was like, I just joked about it, and this is where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And this has become like the mystique of the film. Like, it is this thing. It maybe just goes to show he has to have perhaps a braggadocious side that gets out of control from time to time, but who doesn't have hubris?
That's exactly right. I completely agree. By the way, what I love about that is I prefer to think the best of people. And hearing something like that, just reaffirms kind of the sort of the good, positive feelings. Because I understand how that goes. It's something gets, and it's almost what I said. I was being, I think, less generous at the time, but it's almost what I said in that answer to that reporter who's asking that question. Yeah, he was maybe perhaps taken out of context. Like the context was, he was like, yeah, blah, 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 and didn't even think how it sounded, how it came off. Very well be, but thank you for telling me about that.
No. X-Men characters.
Yes.
X-Men fans love the X-Men, love having these people pop up. I'm a big Nightcrawler guy. I've only really had him once or twice. Was there any X-Men characters that you wanted to bring into this film that you just couldn't work in the end? You couldn't get it to work with the story? Something you really tried to pull home? Or maybe there was one written in for a while and then was taken away again?
There were a couple. I mean, I wanted to try to touch some of the characters who had maybe not made an appearance but were significant. For example, the one that I worked the hardest to convince the studio to say yes to, but quickly let go. I mean, like I made an impassioned plea, but there was a point at which the clock is ticking and we can't have this fight. It's stupid. Was for Thunderbird.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I thought that would have been super cool, man, for that first adventure to have him in there. There was a version that and I don't remember if it was in a full draft or if it was something that was, because look, there were iterations of the script within the script as we were writing it and sending it back for notes. Okay. So, there was a version of the script where Dazzler was in the damn thing. And the coolest thing about that was it was actually one of my favorite little gags, and it's gone forever. It was stupid mutant tricks. It was Banshee releases this huge scream, and Dazzler absorbs all of that and just turns it into a real genius 5 megawatt mega blast of oh Jesus, right? And it was awesome, and I hated that we lost it. But we lost it. I'm trying to think like who else. Those are the two that really stand out was Thunderbird and Dazzler.
Were they in place of someone who wound up in the movie? For example, like, I don't know, Dazzler in place of Angel?
Um, no, it was the reason why we couldn't do Angel was because of Last Stand.
Well, I was thinking, sorry, the Angel in First Class.
Oh, right. I guess yes. Okay, now I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So, yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
That is 100% correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Scott, we are keeping the exclusives coming because we are reuniting with Marvel's Mightiest Mutants to take a look at 2003's X2 X-Men United. What happens when Nightcrawler drops into the party? We're gonna find out. Bamf.
So don't get left out in the cold. Help support your favorite spy movie podcast and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, let's get back to the Spy Jinx.
And what about just other elements or story directions you explored that I guess with the speed you were racing through, there was only so much time, but was there any other elements? Like, for example, I'd read about more of a love triangle involving Moira McTaggart.
Yes, correct.
Was that something that was explored that then just got dropped?
It was less of a triangle. I mean, it was okay. Actually, that's not true. It was a love triangle in this sense. First of all, the relationship between her and Charles was much more important, and I think there was actually a lot of stuff shot that didn't finally end up in the film. But our feeling in writing that first draft was that Moira was the point of view of humanity. Let's put aside all the dumb crap they've done with her in the X-Men books recently, which I hate. But she was humanity, right? She was speaking for us, and she was, Charles's objective correlative for coming to empathize with people. Like, why would they fear and hate us? Well, I'll tell you. And this was something else that Zach and I really thought was important we brought to it, which is, well, yeah, of course they do. You're nuclear weapons. It's not like, oh gosh, you're different and I hate you. It's like, no, I'm afraid of you because you are a loaded gun. And you are capable of anything because people are capable of anything, right? It is rational to be afraid of a mutant. It is 100% rational. And so for Charles, that connection to Moira was super important because he had to have empathy for that fear and understand where it was coming from. And she needed to be the person who was expressing that fear in a way that we could understand it and not just sort of sit back and judge it and feel like we're morally superior to it. Because I promise you, 99%, they'd be like, oh, of course, like, they hate and fear mutants because they're terrible. No, you would too. You absolutely would. And it was a thing that, I think really helped define the difference between Charles and Eric. And if there was a love triangle, it wasn't quite a romantic love triangle. The other part of that triangle was Eric, right? Because what you have, and Charles is the girl in the middle.
Right.
What you have is you have Moira pulling on him from, hey, humans, and think about us, and remember us, and protect us, and we're a little afraid of you. And on this side, you have Eric going, mutants, right? Humans are terrible. Right? Humans, killed my family. They killed millions of Jews. Like they're monsters. And they will kill you too, Charles. They'll kill you too. You need to be with me, right? Like that triangle was super important to the drama of the story. Now, I think that the essence of it remains. And I think that it helps that McAvoy is just fantastic and so subtle and amazing. And I mean, they all are. But that performance is just so great from him, and underrated only in the sense that people were so blown away by Fassbender that, at times I think they forgot to acknowledge how awesome McAvoy was. But yes, there was a love triangle in that way. And in the end, Charles chooses Moira. At the very least, you know what? And we kind of compared it to this. It's the end of X-Men First Class is essentially the end of Heathers,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, Eric, babe, you know what I want? Cool mutants like you out of my life. I mean, that's the end of X-Men First Class. It's like, oh yeah, my boyfriend's, he sucks. And that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a new sheriff in town, and it's going to be me. And I got to take care of Martha Dump Truck.
One thing we haven't brought up yet, and that is kind of our namesake. It's Spy Hards, and people might be wondering why we're talking about X-Men First Class, and we spent a bit of time on the review talking about the spy connections here and sort of the James Bond homages in the film, visual homages, but also just the story is a Cold War story, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Where did the sort of inspiration come from to have that spy story woven in throughout, an X-Men film?
So, that was originally part of Brian's idea to do something like that. It was in no way realized in the Jamie Moss draft. It simply did not materialize in a way that you could detect it. So what Zach and I did, and our inspiration was less Bond than it was the Avengers.
Okay.
So the Hellfire Club was actually like it was in fact the inspiration for the Hellfire Club was the Avengers. It's Emma Peel. There's the whole, my God, I think even in that episode, I'm blanking on the name, but they're up against the Hellfire Club. The whole, like, that amazing dominatrix outfit that she's wearing in that episode, she looks fantastic. That whole vibe, man, because look, Bond is timeless, but the Avengers are just so 60s.
Mm-hmm.
They're so 60s. Like, even when they go to the 70s, they're so 60s. And that was a big part of what we were doing. And we really wanted that spy story to work. Like, that became the core of the movie, of the plot, right? So if the emotional story was a romantic comedy, in some ways it really was. If it was Heathers, like emotionally, and that's what it was.
Sure.
Then the plot that we laid it over was, it was a 60s spy movie. It was, it was the Ipcris File. It was, it was like pick your favorite Bond film. It was any of those things, and that was very much the vibe that we wanted to capture and express and make a character in the movie, and not just have it be, by the way, it's 1963. It should feel like a different time.
And I was curious about Sebastian Shaw as a villain. It's tough to follow up Magneto, and you've had Magneto in the previous films, and so there were some changes made to Sebastian Shaw. How did you sort of wind up with the version that is in the movie?
So it was an interesting story. I mean, I think that a large part of it came down to, first of all, it was Brian's idea to have Sebastian Shaw in the film. Like, that's what he wanted to do. One of the big fights, I don't want to say it was a fight, but like one of the big conversations with Rothman was about Shaw's powers. Rothman acknowledged that Brian really wanted him, but he didn't feel like his powers were very cinematic. And guess what? He's not wrong. His powers are not very cinematic. And having attempted to write them as part of a script where I also have to think about what's the budget and what capabilities do we have to depict this, very difficult. So the idea of, okay, he absorbs energy and kind of redirects it. That was a way of meeting Rothman in the middle and saying, here's something he can do that feels cinematic and cool. And look, the rest is, Shaw is literally based on Robert Shaw, right? It's like he's supposed to be Robert Shaw from Russia with Love. That's who he's supposed to be. Let me list the number of people who can play Robert Shaw as Robert Shaw from Russia with Love. Oh, and that's the list.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
That dude was a man. But that's a whole other conversation. So Shaw had to be who he was. And his defining characteristic needed to be his intelligence and his plan and his vision, right? And the what was underneath it, the evil, right? That what we would sort of perceive as the evil needed to be it needed to be under the surface. It couldn't just be, and now I've got the Hellfire Club, I'm going to take over the world. You had to have a mission, almost one we could get behind, but not quite, right? It's the proto mission that Eric adopts when he truly becomes Magneto, right? Except he makes it, in his mind, he makes it better. That Shaw's plan was about Shaw and Shaw's power and making the world kneel before him because of who he was, because he felt that he should dominate because he and his kind were capable of so much. They should lord over us. Eric's point of view is, well, yes, they should kneel, or maybe they should die. Whatever they do, I don't want them messing with me and my family, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it's, it was, there were a lot of things that Shaw needed to be able to do. And so in some ways, the least important thing about him was showing fealty to his representation from the comic books. And we felt like, look, we are, we're going out of our way to make this stuff feel like the X-Men in this context and really tell an authentic story about these characters in ways that we haven't told those stories. Like nobody had told that Mystique story before, right? Nobody had. Yeah. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of, and that I think that buys us a lot of goodwill to kind of make some changes to Shaw to make him work for the story that we were trying to tell in the time we had.
For sure. But in, the summer of 2011, you had Sebastian Shaw and you had Loki. And those are two terrific supervillains, in comic book adaptations. So, I mean, my props to you, because there's a lot that don't work in terms of comic book movies. And those two were just both bangers.
Thank you. I mean, ironically, our marching orders when we wrote Thor was Kevin said, we need our Magneto. We need you to give us our Magneto. And so we designed Loki so that he would have the kind of emotional depth and nuance that you get from Magneto, even from the Ian McKellen version, which is absolutely terrific, of course, in X-Men and X-Men X2. Of
course, yeah.
So Loki, I mean, honestly, Loki is probably the other thing, that I'm most proud of. That's half of the effort of writing that script and creating that story and crafting that was about how do we make Loki feel like he's a tragic hero in this movie. And it's a digression, but that's why I hate the original, the first Avengers movie, but that's neither here nor there.
I suppose the last question I have for X-Men First Class is, all these trials and tribulations you went through to do it, but, in a positive way, you've created this, you manifested this story. And by the sounds of it, a lot of what you put into it is basically what we got as a finished product. What are your thoughts on the film looking back on it now? And are you pleased with how it all turned out?
Of course. I mean, look, I was very happy that it turned out at all. I mean, it's one of those things that like the simple fact that the whole analogy about the little dog on his hind legs. That whole movie was a little dog on his hind legs. It had no business working. It just like we had no business turning in a complete script after 10 days. That movie had no business working. And it worked. Are there things I go, oh yeah, I would do that differently? Or in the edit, they shouldn't have done it that way, right? Like I, to this day, believe that the movie stops dead when they do the training montage, that it happens in exactly the wrong place. And it kind of forces them into a position where suddenly it's a Sesame Street episode or Batman where Moira's sticking her heads out and going, hey guys,
right,
come watch the TV. So there are little things in the momentum of the movie that I would fix. But no, I mean, I can't complain about that film. It's people love it. It works. It spawned, 4 sequels, one of which was great. Uh, and 2 of which happened, one of which everybody wishes hadn't. I'm looking at you, Dark Phoenix. What the hell is what is that? What happened there? I don't know.
No comment.
I take no responsibility for Dark Phoenix. None at all. Yeah. Yeah.
Smart move.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, folks, I'm very conscious of everyone's time. We've been here for coming up to 2 hours talking about X-Men First Class. And to be fair, I know you were all chomping at the bit to hear about Frankie Muniz and Cody Banks. But I think we have to book in another appointment for Ashley Miller to come back and tell us about that man and his tuxedo.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. But just a quick aside, sometimes when I go to meetings in around town, a couple of times I've had assistants, not once, not twice, like 3 times. I've had assistants who've come up to me as they're leading me into the meeting to say, I wanted to come and get you myself. Well, why is that? Well, because you wrote my favorite movie. Oh, and I'm thinking every single time, X-Men First Class. And they always say, Cody Banks. So there you go. So yeah, I'm happy to come back and talk about it. It's the most beloved film I ever wrote.
Well, and also as your first, motion picture, that's a fascinating journey just to go through that experience as well. Yeah.
That one was also nuts, but yeah, for sure.
Well, watch this space part 2. Ashley Miller will be coming soon, but we're not finished with the mutant conversation because this episode is dropping around the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, which is sort of the coming together of the Fox and Marvel universe to hopefully one big happy family. We'll all find out in theaters soon, I'm sure. I just wanted to throw a quick question to you, Ashley, about sort of your expectations of the film and maybe any of your first-class characters going to turn up in it that you're aware of, or would you like to see, perhaps?
I am unreasonably excited about Deadpool versus Wolverine. I think the first 2 Deadpool movies were great. Wolverine is always fun. Another story for another time. But we were a bit involved in Mangold's first Wolverine film. And he's just a character I've always loved. And I just think that pairing is going to be crazy. I mean, I know Inside Out has made $1 billion. I think Deadpool and Wolverine is going to just crush it. It just feels right. And I would love to see some of the reboot X-Men in that movie. I would love to see Fassbender in that movie. I'd love to see McAvoy. I don't think we're going to see McAvoy because I think you've still got Patrick Stewart kicking around. I mean, you still have Ian McKellen kicking around, but Fassbender sort of became Fassbender because of First Class. So I'd like to see that. I think we will probably see some representation from the Fox X-Men universe other than Xavier. And I'm willing to bet we will see Hank McCoy.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say.
I wonder if we'll see like a January Jones as Emma Frost or something turning up for a brief cameo or something like that. Just those little things I think you might get scattered in this film,
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great.
Now, speaking of things coming up, we are all taking a bold venture to Las Vegas right after Wolverine and Deadpool comes out. We're all heading off to STLV. You with the Inglorious Treksperts and ourselves with the Spy Hearts. We're doing a couple of panels on your stage, of course. Part of your big grand tour you're doing this year with the Inglorious Treksperts. But could you tell us a little about what you've got coming up this summer and what you're doing at STLV?
Oh wow, man! It's going to be a pretty crazy summer. It already is. Mark Altman and I are going to be at San Diego Comic-Con all 4 days when that happens at the end of July, and Darren Doctorman is going to be at GalaxyCon Raleigh while we're there. So we're splitting forces a little bit. Then we're all turning around the next week, and we are going to Las Vegas, Nevada, for Star Trek ST. I guess they can't call it Star Trek, but ST Las Vegas, brought to you by Creation Entertainment, where they have made the terrible mistake of asking Mark, Darren, and myself to program 4 days worth of fun-filled, industry-specific content. And we have invited you crazy cats to come in and moderate a panel. You guys are doing more than one, or are you doing one?
We're hosting one panel
And you're on another
Our
one, right?
Man Bashir, but we're on another one, and I'm talking about doing a third one with Mark currently. Watch this space.
That'll be awesome. You guys are terrific. And it's going to be a whole lot of fun, man. And ideally, not ideally, I know that we have a lot of people coming in for these panels. They're very different from what Creation normally gets for their ST Las Vegas show. The usual way these things go is you bring in actors and you talk to them about their Star Trek careers and do you like phasers and all that other stuff, which is not really how, Mark and Darren and I roll when we get people on stage anyway, but it's the standard thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what we really want to bring to the stage in Vegas is a little more of a I don't want to say a Comic-Con feel because it's not really a marketing exercise, but it's a little more Paley Fest, right? It's a little more Austin Film Festival. It's a little more about how the sausage is made, talking to writers, directors, not just actors, about how all of this stuff happened, whether it's good or bad, man. Like, it's like whether it's Star Trek 2 or if it's it's Generations. It's having really substantive talks with people that these audiences don't usually get to see. And then there's some fun stuff that I wish I could talk more about. We'll be able to talk more about soon that I don't think that they've ever quite done before. But it should be super cool. The stage is just going to be packed. And, hopefully everybody is sober enough to enjoy it and drunk enough to make it enjoyable.
Like Cam and I met at Star Trek Las Vegas or ST Las Vegas about 12, 13 years ago. This entire podcast exists because of Star Trek. And, we always say that the best conversations we have with these SpyMaster interviews, and actually you are proof of the pudding at this, that much as we love talking to people like Denise Richards, actors and actresses that have worked in our favorite spy movies, the most insightful conversations we always have are with people like yourself, Ashley, with screenwriters, with directors who make films. And you find there's the passion about it and the nuts and bolts of how films are put together. And I find they are far more interesting conversations, and I think that's a lot of what you're bringing, not just to Star Trek Las Vegas, but a lot of what Inglorious Treksperts does as well for Star Trek. And that's why I always firmly recommend Inglorious Treksperts as a go-to Star Trek podcast, because you guys do it, keeping the British end up as you were, when it comes to Star Trek.
Well, thank you very much. It's definitely it's a labor of love, and it's funny. I said at the beginning of the podcast how I wound up in this business, and part of it was preparation and really breaking down how people think. And one of the things that we really like to bring to the stage or to the podcast booth when we talk to people is preparation. We like to talk to people about things that maybe they haven't really talked about a lot before, or they thought nobody would be interested in, or maybe they'd forgotten. Right? We like to break down what's important to them and why. All those things that you say about process lead to really great conversation about product. Much more interesting than, well, did you like the color of the sets, or what was your favorite episode, or any of those standard questions. And I hope that when we get to Vegas, when I say we, I mean all of us here right now, and Mark and Darren, that is what we are offering to the audience who shows up and sits their butts down and starts to listen, something that they have never heard before, because the people who are sitting on stage moderating the conversation care enough about the conversation to prepare for it and be interested ourselves.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's your marching orders, folks. If you want to see three professionals in the Inglorious Treksperts hosting the Inglorious Treksperts stage over in STLV, and two fools in Cam and I, up on stage too, you can find out more about that at Creation Entertainment's website. There'll be links in the show notes below to find out more. Now, I have one final question for you, Ashley, before I let you go. And this has been asked to every single person that's been on the show, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask it to you.
Sure.
Ashley E. Miller, what is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Oh, man. That is a super tough question. I mean, you know what? I'm going to say, and maybe it's not for a great reason, but I don't care. my favorite spy movie of all time is Live and Let Die because it was the first Bond movie I ever saw.
Right. And no one's ever mentioned that one, actually.
Beautiful.
Well, there you go. And also, it has that great line. It looks like a large man with a very small head got into a fight with a chicken. I mean, come on! How do you not like that movie?
It's so quotable.
Yeah.
That one.
He always had an inflated opinion of himself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. How do you not love it? And Jane Seymour.
Oh man, we had Gloria Hendry on a couple of years ago
Uh-huh.
now. She was great. Live and Let Die is a wonderful choice. Ashley E. Miller, where can people find you online? Hear more from Inglorious Treksperts, hear more from the 430 movie, and everything like that.
On Twitter, you can find me at AshMaster0. That's also my Instagram, technically, but I almost never use it. So you can look for me there and you might find me. Probably won't be there. And then of course, Inglorious Treksperts, 430 movie, Deck 78, which is one of our spin-off podcasts where we talk about Star Trek adjacent subjects. Every so often, I do a show called Cartoon Barroom with our good friend Steve Melching from the 430 movie, who worked on stuff like the Clone Wars and Rebels and has been doing animation forever. It's I'm around. I'm around.
Well, it just leaves me to say, for the first time, but hopefully not the last, Ashley, thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
This was a blast.
Thank you guys so much.
There you go, folks. That was our chat with Mr. Ashley E. Miller. I want to thank Ashley once again for taking the time to sit down for close to 2 hours to talk about X-Men First Class. You will not get coverage like this anywhere else apart from Spy Hard's podcast, and this is the sort of thing I love that we do on this show, digging into the depths of spy movies and bringing up stories that you've never heard before.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone out there still have questions about X-Men First Class? I doubt it. I feel like, Ashley did a great job summing up the entire experience and giving us all sorts of interesting details. Dazzler was going to appear at one point in the movie. That's awesome. Sunspot, we got an explanation as to why Sunspot didn't show up. And then also, he revealed that he was at one point working on a crossover film with the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Daredevil characters. I mean, guys, this is explosive stuff.
I like the use of explosive. Very well done there, sir. And I mean, there is a parallel universe, a multiverse out there where Hugh Jackman was on screen with Ben Affleck's Daredevil.
Mm-hmm.
Can you believe it?
I am more fascinated by the Fantastic Four characters popping up in this because, I've seen those two Fantastic Fours and they have some positive merits to them, but those characters feel kind of cartoony.
Mm-hmm.
And to cross them over with the Ben Affleck Daredevil or the X-Men characters, it feels like those two franchises are a little more serious.
No, I do completely agree. And I think the other thing for me that really stood out from this chat, and it was a wonderful deep dive, and we won't sort of stick around too long afterwards to discuss it because you've been here for 2 hours. But the thing that really jumped out to me is that what was really important to Ashley was the two leads. Xavier and Magneto. That was the emphasis for him and his co-writer. And I think that's the thing that really worked for us when we were reviewing the film earlier this week. That is the shining star of this film, James McAvoy and Fassbender.
But also, as a big villain fan, he gave us Sebastian Shaw and also Loki in the first Thor movie. And so to hear him talk about, creating these characters and, he was very humble about it, but we have watched a lot of comic book movies with a lot of forgettable villains, and he clearly understands how to make them work. And just going over the process of, especially Sebastian Shaw, how does this character fit into this film? What do we have to change? How do we make him work and interesting? It's all on the screen, and that, performance by Kevin Bacon and just the character on the page is really great.
Absolutely. And just to finally say, sort of wrap us up on the interview, it's just really fascinating to see the process. This is really where SpyHard's SpyMaster interviews come and shine, when we really get to that sort of drama school, filmmaking school. You can learn to be a screenwriter through this process, and hearing about the journey it took to make this script in a very short amount of time and how close to the wire they were. It really just shows that sometimes genius comes from pressure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, 9 days for a first draft that had to be able to be greenlit.
Crazy.
That's nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But Again, I think as far as the deep dive, as you said, Cam, goes into X-Men First Class, you can't get any better than this. And pivoting us over now to talking about what's coming up next week, we have a milestone and some events coming up. I kind of want to talk about first before I throw it to you, because we mentioned at the end of the interview that Cam and I will be on stage at Star Trek Las Vegas literally days after this episode comes out. I don't know if you'll be making any last-minute adjustments to come to see us, but maybe you're a Las Vegas local and you are thinking about going to STLV, you can catch us on stage at Star Trek Las Vegas, and we'll put some details in the show notes below. We've got a couple of panels that we'll be part of, and definitely worth checking out. And it's run by the Inglorious Treksperts podcast, which Ashley is a part of. We're part of their celebration on the Inglorious Treksperts stage. If you want to come and see the Spy Hards live, this is the way to do it.
This is going to be exciting, and it is also, of course, the first time that Scott and I have ever been live on stage together. So those who appreciate a good train wreck, come see us.
Yeah, I can't promise it'll be good, but I promise it'll be funny.
We can promise we will be there on stage.
One of us might flatline and pass out during the process. Probably Cam, but, we'll find out.
That's right, yes.
So that's a part of the big thing. But, for those who've been following us along over the years, you know that usually annually me and Cam go to Las Vegas, which is part of this convention that we're doing the panels at. And we meet every year. But it also generally falls around the time of our anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And next week will more or less mark the 4th anniversary of Spy Hards podcast. 4 years I've been on the air with you, Cam. And I could make a joke about how I had hair when I started this podcast. It's true, folks. I genuinely did. Or I can make a joke about how it's taken years off of my life. But ultimately, I'm very proud of what we've done here on this show. And I hope that you are, Cam. And I hope that those of you listening love what you hear every week. And I hope that you sing the praises of Spy Hards to anyone who mentions they love spy movies and you share that love with them. It's been a genuine pleasure and an honor being on the waves and the airwaves with you for the last 4 years, and long may it continue.
It is often daunting when I look at where we started and where we are now to, have started with a, modest episode on Goldeneye that we laughed a lot and had a great time doing. But, we were using like Zoom audio at that point. Like it was just a more archaic time for us in the, overall run of what Spy Hards is. And now I look back at the number of, celebrities and writers and directors and producers that have been gracious enough to join us on the show and talk about their process like Ashley did this week. But there's so many more. And maybe that cues me up, honestly, for how we're going to celebrate our 4th anniversary, Scott.
Well, I think it does. And I think just to sort of to build up the hype, to help Cam because Cam gets to be the guy who makes this announcement, not me. This is our 4th year. We are in Las Vegas. We wanted to celebrate. How do you celebrate spy movies in Las Vegas on an anniversary, Cam?
I can think of plenty of ways, but the best way is by talking to Lana Wood about her performance as Plenty O'Toole in Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh my God. Lana Wood, Plenty O'Toole, Diamonds Are Forever will be in your ears and for your ears only next week on the show. It's a fantastic interview. We go through the beats, through the nuts and bolts of Diamonds Are Forever, stories about the whole cast, behind the scenes, how they made the film. Lana is an absolute riot. You guys will have the best of time, just like we did recording it with her.
Yeah, this was a total ball to record, and we've had this one in the bank for a little bit, and I've been dying to release this one to all of you.
For sure. We can't wait for you all to hear it. To celebrate 4 years of Spy Hards, come and do it with us. Grab yourself a martini and join us in Las Vegas, whether it's in person or in spirit, and roll the dice and join us as we sit down with Miss Lana Wood to talk about what it's like to be a Bond girl and what it's like to work on Diamonds Are Forever. I just can't believe we're here, man. I'm so proud of us. I'm so proud of what we've done. And I'm so happy you guys get to hear our chat with Lana Wood. So your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week on Spy Hards. Celebrate our 4th anniversary on the air as we sit down with Miss Lana Wood. If you like what you heard on this show, please consider joining us over on our Patreon page. We've got a bunch of different payment options and a bunch of bonus content you can get your hands on, which is lovely. But mostly, it's about supporting the show and helping us keep the lights on here at SpyHards HQ. We are not funded by a big media company. It's just Cam and me holding on to the reins for dear life, trying to make it through week to week. So if you can help us do it in a more stable fashion, we would genuinely appreciate your support and your patronage. You can find out more details at the show notes below, patreon.com/spyhards. There's plenty to get there, but really, it's just about sharing some love. And if you can't, that's absolutely fine. We know you're all out there and you love the show. The thing you can do for free, tell a friend. Share us on social media. If you find a post by SpyHards, give us a retweet, tell a friend. That's all for free. We appreciate it all. Can't wait for this 4th anniversary. I'm so psyched for that. If you don't already follow us, make sure you do it discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, you'll find Cam and I desperately searching for Reed Richards' noodly arms.